The coffee in my mug had gone cold 2 hours ago, but I kept wrapping my hands around it anyway. It was something to hold on to, something familiar, because nothing else in my life felt that way anymore. I wasn't. The 1 year old, working as a mid-level project coordinator at Hargrove & Associates, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in downtown Chicago. Not glamorous. Not what I'd imagined when I graduated from DePaul with a business degree. But it was stable, the benefits were decent, and I was good at my job. Or at least I thought I was. I'd been there 6 years. 6 years of early mornings and late nights, of picking up slack when the team was short-staffed, of covering for people who never once said thank you. 6 years of watching people with half my experience get promoted because they played golf with the right partners or had the right last name. I told myself it was fine. I told myself my time would come. I never expected that what would finally crack everything open wasn't a promotion or a performance review. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when my husband's brother walked into my office and told me I was being reassigned. Let me back up. My husband and I had been married for 4 years. We met in our late 20s. Him through a mutual friend at a rooftop party in Wicker Park. Me half convinced I'd leave early because I had work the next day. I didn't leave early. We talked until the host started stacking chairs. He was funny in the quiet way I liked best. The kind of funny that sneaks up on you. And he had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. What I didn't know, what he didn't tell me until 6 months into our relationship, was that his family owned Hargrove & Associates. Not partially. Not as silent investors. His father had founded the company 32 years ago and his family held controlling interest. My husband had deliberately taken himself off the organizational chart years before we met. He told me early on that he worked in real estate consulting, which was technically true. He just left out the part where the company he consulted for was his family's. When he finally told me, I was angry. Genuinely, deeply angry. Not because of the money or the prestige. I didn't care about any of that. I was angry because I'd spent 6 months building something real with someone I thought I knew, and there was this entire massive thing he'd been keeping from me. We had a bad 2 weeks. We talked it through. He explained that every time he told anyone early in a relationship about his family, it changed things in ways he hated. The dynamic shifted. People either pulled away or leaned in too hard for the wrong reasons. He'd wanted me to know him first. I understood it. I didn't fully forgive it right away, but I understood it. By the time we got engaged, I'd made peace with the situation. I kept working at Hargrove because I was good at what I did, and because I genuinely needed the financial independence. We'd agreed before we got married that I would keep my own income, my own career. I didn't want to be an extension of his family's empire. I wanted to be a person. The one condition I'd set, and the one my husband had honored completely, was that no one at work would know. Not management, not HR, not my colleagues. I was just an employee. I filed my work under my maiden name, which I'd kept professionally. My husband stayed off the premises. It worked for 4 years perfectly until his brother arrived. My brother-in-law was 2 years younger than my husband and the precise opposite of him in almost every way. Where my husband was measured and thoughtful, my brother-in-law was loud in that performative way that mistakes volume for confidence. He'd spent the last several years in Los Angeles doing something vague in commercial development that I never fully understood, and from what my husband said, his father had grown frustrated with his lack of direction, so they'd brought him into Hargrove to learn the operations. Nobody told me he was coming. I found out the same way everyone else did. A company-wide email from the managing director on a Monday morning introducing Mr. Burt, Nathaniel Hargrove, as the new senior operations liaison, reporting directly to the executive team and asking all department heads to extend their full cooperation. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and stared at my office wall for a solid 3 minutes. Nathaniel, my husband had mentioned him. I'd met him twice. Once at a Christmas dinner that was awkward from the moment I arrived. Once at a cousin's engagement party where he spent most of the evening talking over people. Both times, he barely registered me. I wasn't, as brother's wife, someone peripheral, someone forgettable. I decided the best approach was to be professional and invisible. Do my job. Keep my head down. Let whatever this was play itself out. That lasted exactly 8 days. He came into the project coordination office on a Wednesday afternoon while I was running a status update with my colleague. My closest friend at the firm, a woman named Priya who'd been there almost as long as I had. She was the kind of person who remembered your coffee order and also quietly held you accountable for your deadlines, both with equal amounts of warmth. Priya had been dealing with a family health situation for the past few months. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease, and the medical bills were beginning to pile up in ways that kept her awake at night. She'd mentioned it to me once, quietly, and then never brought it up again, because that was who she was. Nathaniel walked in with the particular energy of someone who has decided in advance that everything in the room belongs to him. He introduced himself to Priya without making eye contact with her. He looked at the project timeline on her screen, said, "This system looks outdated," and then turned to me. "You're the coordinator on the Henderson account," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. I'm restructuring how we handle mid-tier commercial accounts. Your role is being moved under direct operations oversight. He set a printed memo on my desk, an actual printed memo in 2026, and tapped it with one finger. You'll report to my office for briefing starting Friday. I looked at the memo. It had his name at the top in a font that felt very deliberate. Has this been cleared with Sarah? I asked. Sarah was my direct supervisor, the director of project management, a competent and fair woman who had been running her department efficiently for 11 years. Sarah's team is being realigned, he said. This comes from the executive level. He left before I could ask anything else. I sat there for a moment. Priya was very carefully not looking at me. Wow, she said finally, very quietly. Yeah, I said. I called my husband that evening. He was in Denver for work, actual consulting work, for an outside client. I told him what had happened, and I could hear the shift in his voice even through the phone. That particular tightening that meant he was trying to figure out how much his family had done without telling him. He's not supposed to have that kind of authority yet, he said. Dad told me he'd be in an observational role for at least 6 months. Well, he gave me a memo, a long pause. I'll call Dad. Please don't make it about me, I said. I can handle it. I just wanted you to know. I meant that. I wasn't asking him to fix it. I built my career at that company on my own terms, and I intended to defend it the same way. What I didn't want was for Nathaniel to ever find out who I was, because the moment that happened, everything I'd built would be recontextualized as something I'd gotten because of my last name. Even if nothing changed practically, it would change in every way that mattered. The Friday briefing started. I went. I took notes. I gave accurate status reports and answered every question with the kind of precise professionalism that requires actual work to sustain. Nathaniel was not impressed by precision. He was the kind of person who interpreted thoroughness as a challenge. The first time he pushed back on my numbers, I showed him my documentation. He looked at it and said, "I'm not interested in how it was done before. I'm interested in how we're going to do it going forward." The second time, he reassigned one of my accounts to a junior coordinator without telling me. I found out when my contact at Henderson called me confused about who she should be talking to. I spent 40 minutes on the phone smoothing it over, then wrote Nathaniel a professional email asking that any account transitions be communicated to me in advance to avoid client confusion. He replied with 2 sentences saying he appreciated my feedback and reminding me to copy his assistant on all client communications going forward. I forwarded the email thread to my personal folder and said nothing. The 3rd time, he came into my office with a man I didn't recognize, someone from his personal network I gathered, not a Hargrove employee, and sat down across from my desk while I was in the middle of a call. I held up one finger. He kept talking to his companion at a volume that was clearly intended to communicate that my phone call was not his concern. I wrapped up the call as quickly as I could, apologized to the client for the noise, and looked across my desk. "I need your Henderson projections by tomorrow morning," Nathaniel said. "Full revision, new format. I'll have my assistant send you the template tonight. The Henderson projections are due to the client at the end of the month," I said. A full revision mid-cycle could create inconsistencies that— "Tomorrow morning," he said, and stood up. After he left, I sat very still and thought about whether I was going to do this, whether I was going to let this go on. That evening, I called Priya. She'd been dealing with her own version of the problem. Nathaniel had decided her department's intake process was inefficient and had implemented new requirements that essentially doubled the administrative load without adding any staff. She was coming in an hour early every day just to keep up. "How's your mom?" I asked. A pause. "The same. The dialysis schedule changed, which means I have to adjust my hours, but I talked to HR and they said it should be fine." Her voice was tired in that way people's voices get when they've been managing too much for too long. "Is there anything I can do?" "You can help me survive this restructuring," she said and laughed, but not really. I went home and told my husband everything. Not to ask him to intervene, but because I needed him to understand what was happening on the ground, away from whatever his father was telling the executive team. "He doesn't know who you are," my husband said. "No." "What do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long time. I want to handle it myself. But I need to know, does he actually have the authority he says he has, or is he inflating it? My husband was quiet. "I'll find out." What he found out, and what he told me 2 days later, was that Nathaniel had been given a title and access but not formal authority over existing departmental structures. His role was observational and advisory. He did not have the power to reassign accounts, mandate reporting changes, or override departmental supervisors. Every memo he'd sent out existed in a gray zone that nobody on the executive team had officially signed off on, because they'd assumed he understood the limits of his position. He didn't understand them, or he understood them and was choosing to ignore them. My husband offered again to call his father. "Not yet," I said. I went to Sarah instead. I laid out the situation factually with documentation, the account reassignment, the reporting structure changes, the overnight project revisions. I didn't editorialize. I just showed her the timeline of what had happened and let her read it. She was quiet for a moment after she finished. "How long has this been going on?" she said. "About 3 weeks. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I looked at her. "I wanted to make sure I had enough to show you. And honestly, I thought I might be overreacting." She shook her head slowly. "You're not overreacting." She went to the managing director. The managing director went to the executive team. And somewhere in that chain of conversations, it came out that the person Nathaniel had been treating as a project coordinator to be reshuffled and overridden was, in fact, his brother's wife and the daughter-in-law of the man who owned the company. I found out this had become known on a Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed and it was Nathaniel's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short and careful in the way that messages become when someone has recently been informed they made a serious mistake. He said he hoped we could set up a time to speak. He said he valued collaboration. He said he was sorry if there had been any miscommunication. 4 weeks of deliberate overreach, and he'd landed on miscommunication. I didn't call him back that day. What happened next came in two parts, and both of them surprised me. The first was the conversation with my father-in-law. He called me directly, not through my husband, directly, and asked if I would come to his office. I drove downtown on a Friday morning, and for the first time in 4 years, I walked into Hargrove and Associates not as a project coordinator, but as the person I actually was. He was a quiet man, serious in a way that had softened some with age, I thought. He sat across from me and didn't offer me coffee or small talk. He just looked at me for a moment and said, "I owe you an apology." I hadn't expected that. "I should have told Nathaniel about your situation before he started," he said. "I didn't, because I thought he would handle himself professionally regardless. That was my mistake. What happened to you at your job? The reassignments, the pressure, being treated like you had no standing? That was wrong, and it happened on my watch." I sat with that for a moment. "I didn't tell my husband about most of it until recently," I said. "I didn't want it handled for me." "I know," he said. "He told me that about you a long time ago. He said you were the kind of person who figured things out yourself." A small pause. He was right. I didn't cry. I came close, but I held it. "What happens to my position?" I asked. "Nothing changes unless you want it to. You've earned your role. You've done good work. The documentation Sarah showed the managing director was thorough." He said that last word was something that sounded like approval. "If you want a different role, more responsibility, a formal title, that offer is on the table. But it comes from your work, not from your last name." I told him I'd think about it. The second part was about Priya. I went to find her after I left my father-in-law's office. She was at her desk, working through the backlog that Nathaniel's new intake requirements had created. I sat down across from her. "I have something I need to tell you," I said. I told her everything. About my husband, about his family, about why I'd kept it quiet. I wasn't. Her face as I talked. The small shifts of surprise, the recalibration, the moment she understood the full shape of what the last month had looked like. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You never used it," she said. "Any of it, even when he was making your life miserable." "That was the point," I said. She looked at me carefully. Then she said, "Your mother-in-law is on the hospital foundation board, isn't she? The one affiliated with Northwestern." I paused. "She is. My mom's care team is at Northwestern." I knew what she was asking, and I knew it was hard for her to ask it. Priya was not someone who asked for things. In 6 years, I'd never heard her ask for anything. She hadn't already tried every other way to get on her own. "Tell me what you need," I said. What she needed was a referral to the kidney specialist program, which had a wait list, and some clarity on whether her mother's insurance coverage would hold through the transition to a more intensive care schedule. Both of those things were things my mother-in-law could help navigate, not by paying for anything, not by pulling strings in some dramatic way, but by making 2 phone calls to people she knew and explaining the situation. I called my mother-in-law that afternoon. I explained who Priya was, a colleague, a good person, someone who had been showing up and doing her job and taking care of her family without complaint for as long as I'd known her. My mother-in-law listened carefully, asked a few specific questions about the care timeline, and said she'd make some calls. Priya's mother got an appointment with the specialist within 2 weeks. I'm not going to pretend that solved everything, because it didn't. Medical situations are long and hard and they don't resolve neatly. But it moved something that had been stuck, and it opened a door that Priya could walk through on her own terms. She texted me on the day of her mother's first appointment. Just 3 words. "Thank you, Anna. That's my name." The one almost nobody at the office had ever had a reason to look up. Nathaniel was moved back into the observational role he'd been assigned from the beginning. Whether he understood why, I don't know. I didn't have a dramatic confrontation with him. There was no moment where he stood in the conference room and everyone watched him be put in his place. Real life doesn't usually work that way, and honestly, I didn't need that. What I needed was my work to matter. I needed to have handled something difficult with my own hands. I took the meeting with the managing director about a senior role. I told him I wanted it to be structured properly, formal title, appropriate compensation, clear reporting lines, nothing informal, nothing assumed. He agreed to all of it. My husband picked me up from the office that evening. I got in the car and he looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything for a minute. He'd spent 4 years respecting my need to be anonymous in my own right. He'd kept his word completely, even when it cost him. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." He pulled out of the parking garage and into the Chicago evening. The city lit up and loud around us, and I rolled down the window and let the cold March air in just for a moment. The same kind of cold I'd grown up with, the kind that stings a little and then, somehow, feels like home. I thought about something my father-in-law had said before I left his office. He'd told me that the hardest thing in his experience was finding people who would do the work right, even when no one was watching, even when they had every reason not to. I hadn't done it for him. I hadn't even done it for my husband. I'd done it because I couldn't stand the alternative. The version of myself that would have made one phone call and let her last name smooth everything over. That person would have been more comfortable. She would have had a much easier few weeks, but she wouldn't have been me. There's a version of this story where I made one phone call in week 1 and none of it happened. No memos on my desk. No reassigned accounts. No late nights documenting every interaction just to prove I wasn't imagining things. I could have said my husband's last name and watched the whole situation dissolve. I chose not to, and I've thought a lot about why that choice mattered. Not just for me, but for what it actually produced. What Nathaniel didn't understand, and what I don't think he's built to understand yet, is that authority borrowed from a name isn't the same thing as authority you've earned. He walked into that office with access and a title and assumed those two things were enough to make people follow him. They weren't. The people who actually kept that company running, Sarah, Priya, the coordinators who came in early and stayed late, they could read the difference immediately. They always can. That's something you can't fake your way through, and no amount of printed memos changes it. I think about Priya a lot when I think about how this ended. She spent months absorbing the extra load Nathaniel created, coming in an hour early, managing her mother's medical situation in the margins of her own exhaustion, never once asking anyone to acknowledge how much she was carrying. That's a kind of quiet strength that doesn't get named or rewarded often enough. What I could do for her, connecting her mother to the right care team, cost me almost nothing. One phone call to someone I already knew, but I hadn't made that call for 4 years, not because I forgot I could, but because I hadn't let myself think about what it meant to have access and choose not to use it. Priya's situation showed me the difference between restraint that protects your integrity and restraint that just keeps you comfortable. There's something I keep coming back to from everything that happened, the way my father-in-law described it. Finding people who do the work right even when no one is watching isn't just about work ethic. It's about something deeper than that. It's about knowing who you are when the situation gives you every excuse to be someone else. I had an easy exit the entire time. I had leverage I never used, and the reason I didn't use it wasn't fear or strategy. It was that I needed to know for myself that the work I'd done over 6 years was real, that I'd built something that stood on its own. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity. It's not a reward. It doesn't protect you from hard situations. It doesn't make difficult people leave you alone. What it does is give you something solid to stand on when everything else is shaking. When Nathaniel was handing out memos and reassigning my accounts, I had 6 years of documentation, relationships, and results. He had a title and an assumption. One of those things holds. I don't know exactly what Nathaniel took from all of this. That's not mine to know. What I took from it is that the moments that define you aren't usually the big dramatic ones. They're the small daily choices. Whether to cut corners, whether to use a shortcut that's available to you, whether to stay quiet when speaking up costs you something. Those choices accumulate. They become who you are. And eventually, without fanfare, they become what other people see when they look at you. That cold March air coming through the car window on the drive home, I still think about that. The city loud and lit up and me just breathing, knowing I hadn't traded anything I'd actually need later.